The December wind cut through Victoria Ann's threadbare coat like a knife as she stumbled along the mountain trail, her boots leaving uneven prints in the light dusting of snow that had begun to fall an hour before dawn. She had been walking for 3 weeks since leaving Kansas, and California seemed no closer now than it had when she started, especially now that she found herself climbing higher into the Colorado Rockies instead of descending toward warmer valleys. Her father had died of consumption in September. Her mother followed him 2 weeks later, and the bank had wasted no time claiming their small farm for unpaid debts she never knew existed. At 22 years old, Victoria had nothing but the clothes on her back, $17 sewn into her hem, and a cousin in Sacramento who had written once, 5 years ago, saying she would always have a place if she needed it. The trail narrowed as it wound around a steep cliff face, and Victoria pressed herself against the rock wall, trying not to look down at the dizzying drop to her right. Her fingers were numb despite the gloves she had knitted herself 3 winters ago, now worn thin at the fingertips. She had not eaten since yesterday morning, saving the last of her bread for when the hunger became truly unbearable. The altitude made her head swim, and she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake trying to cross through these mountains, instead of taking the longer route south. A sound above made her freeze. Rocks clattered down the slope, bouncing past her and disappearing over the edge. Victoria looked up and saw a rider on a paint horse picking his way down a path she had not noticed, one that seemed to materialize from the rock face itself. The man sat tall in his saddle, wearing a heavy sheepskin coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the wind. He had seen her, she realized, and was deliberately heading in her direction. Victoria's heart hammered. She had avoided men on the road when possible, and when not possible, she had kept her hand on the small knife in her pocket and her wits about her. But here, on this narrow trail with nowhere to run, she had no choice but to wait and see what this stranger wanted. The rider brought his horse to a stop 20 feet away, where the path widened slightly. He dismounted with easy grace despite what Victoria guessed was a frame well over 6 feet tall. When he pushed back his hat, she saw a young face, weathered by sun and wind but not much older than her own. Dark hair fell past his collar, and his eyes were an unusual shade of gray-green that reminded her of sage. "You are lost," he said. It was not a question. His voice was deep and carried a faint accent she could not quite place, something that rounded his vowels and softened his consonants. "I am heading to California," Victoria said, lifting her chin despite her exhaustion. "I know exactly where I am going." The corner of his mouth twitched, but he did not smile. "This trail leads to a mining camp that has been abandoned for 2 years. Beyond that, nothing but cliffs and a box canyon. California is not this direction." Victoria felt her stomach drop. She had been following what she thought were wagon ruts for the past day and a half. "I must have taken a wrong turn." 3 days ago at the fork near Beaver Creek, the stranger said. "I saw your tracks there. I wondered if you would realize your mistake before you got yourself killed." "You have been following me for 3 days, Victoria demanded, anger flaring hot in her chest despite the cold. "These mountains are mine," he said simply. "I have a ranch in the high valleys. I keep track of who comes through, especially in winter when the storms can kill a person in hours. You are lucky the weather has held." Victoria looked at the snow falling around them, already accumulating in the creases of the trail. "This is weather holding. This is nothing," the man said. "I am Zachary Vance. My ranch is 6 miles from here. You should come there, warm yourself, eat something. In the morning, I will set you on the right trail to California." Every instinct told Victoria to refuse. She did not know this man, and a woman alone accepting hospitality from a stranger was asking for trouble. But the alternative was continuing on a trail that led nowhere, with night coming and the temperature already dropping fast enough that she could feel it through her coat. Zachary seemed to read her hesitation. "My grandmother lives with me," he said, "and my younger sister. You would not be alone with me if that is your worry." It was her worry, but Victoria was practical enough to recognize when pride could get her killed. She nodded stiffly. "I appreciate your hospitality, Mr. Vance." "Just Zachary," he said, and this time he did smile just a little. "I am not much for formalities up here." He offered her his hand to help her up onto his horse. Victoria hesitated only a moment before taking it. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip strong and steady. He swung up behind her with the ease of someone who had been riding since childhood, and Victoria found herself acutely aware of his warmth at her back, blocking the wind. The ride to Zachary's ranch took them up and over a ridge Victoria never would have found on her own, then down into a valley so well hidden she understood why he called these mountains his. The valley was sheltered on all sides by steep slopes thick with pine and aspen, and a creek ran through the bottom, not yet frozen despite the season. The ranch itself sat on a rise above the creek, a sturdy log house with a barn and several outbuildings, all built to withstand the harsh mountain winters. Smoke rose from the chimney, and as they approached, the door opened. A girl of perhaps 16 stood in the doorway, wrapped in a colorful shawl. "Zach," she called. "Grandmother said you would bring someone. She has been cooking all afternoon." Zachary helped Victoria down from the horse. "This is my sister, Sarah. Sarah, our guest is heading to California." She took a wrong turn. "In December," Sarah said, shaking her head but smiling. "Come inside, you must be frozen through." The warmth of the house hit Victoria like a wall and she swayed on her feet. Zachary's hand steadied her elbow. "Slowly," he murmured. "Your body needs to adjust." The main room of the house was larger than Victoria expected, with a huge stone fireplace at one end and a long wooden table that could seat a dozen people. Herbs hung drying from the rafters, and colorful woven rugs covered the plank floor. An old woman stood at the stove, stirring something that smelled so good Victoria's mouth watered despite her dizziness. "Grandmother, this is Victoria," Zachary said, switching to a language Victoria did not recognize. The old woman replied in the same tongue, her dark eyes sharp as they assessed Victoria. "My grandmother speaks mostly Norwegian," Zachary explained. "She says you are too thin and need feeding. I told her you are traveling to California. She says California will still be there after you eat." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by the simple kindness of strangers. "Thank you," she managed. Sarah took her arm and led her to the table. "Sit before you fall down. I will bring you something to drink." The meal that followed was the best Victoria had eaten in months. Thick stew rich with venison and vegetables, fresh bread still warm from the oven, butter churned that morning. Zachary's grandmother, whose name was Ingrid, kept refilling Victoria's bowl until she had to protest that she could not possibly eat another bite. The old woman nodded with satisfaction and said something in Norwegian that made Zachary laugh. "What did she say?" Victoria asked. "That you have good manners, but you were about to starve to death, so she forgives you for eating like a bird," Zachary translated. "And she wants to know why a young woman is walking to California alone in winter." Victoria set down her spoon. The full stomach and the warmth of the fire were making her drowsy, but she owed these people an explanation. "My parents died. I lost our farm. My only family is a cousin in Sacramento." "You are walking to California," Zachary said slowly. From where, Kansas, outside of Lawrence. Silence fell around the table. Sarah's eyes went wide. That is hundreds of miles, over 1,000, Victoria said. I know. But I had no money for the train, and the wagon companies will not take a woman traveling alone. Walking was my only option. Zachary leaned back in his chair, studying her with those sage-colored eyes. You would die in these mountains. You know that, yes. Even if I put you on the right trail tomorrow, you have weeks of walking through winter country. The snows will come hard soon. You have no proper gear, no food supplies, no weapon beyond that little knife I saw you touch when I rode up. I will manage, Victoria said, hearing the stubbornness in her own voice. I have made it this far. This far being lost and half frozen, Zachary said bluntly. I am not trying to frighten you, Victoria Ann. I am telling you the truth. These mountains do not care about determination or courage. They kill people who are not prepared. Then what would you have me do? Victoria asked, frustration rising. Stay here until spring. I cannot impose on your hospitality for months, and I need to reach my cousin. She is expecting me. Is she expecting you? Zachary asked quietly. Or did you write to her from Kansas, and she has no idea when you might arrive or even if you are still coming? Victoria looked down at her hands. He was right, of course. She had sent a letter, but that had been weeks ago, and her cousin's response, if there ever was one, would have gone to an address that was no longer hers. Ingrid spoke, a long stream of Norwegian. Zachary listened, then nodded. My grandmother says you will stay the winter. We have room, and we can always use an extra pair of hands on a ranch. In the spring, when the pass is clear, I will take you down to Georgetown. The town is 20 miles from here, in the valley. From there, you can catch a stage to Denver, and from Denver, you can take the train to California in comfort and safety. I cannot pay you, Victoria said. I have only $17 to my name. We are not asking for payment, Zachary said. We are offering you work and shelter and safety through the winter. In return, you help Sarah and my grandmother with the house and the chickens and the garden preserving. It is a fair trade. Victoria looked around the table. Sarah was nodding eagerly. Ingrid had gone back to the stove but was watching Victoria with an expression that reminded her achingly of her own mother. And Zachary sat relaxed in his chair, waiting for her answer without pressure, without expectation, just an offer given freely. She thought of the trail outside, already covered in snow. She thought of the weeks of walking still ahead, through mountains that wanted to kill her. She thought of arriving in Sacramento, if she even survived the journey, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the hope that a cousin she barely knew would take her in. I would be grateful to stay, Victoria said softly. Thank you. Sarah clapped her hands. You can have the room next to mine. It is small, but it has a good stove and the window faces the sunrise. The room Sarah showed her was indeed small, but it was clean and warm and had a real bed with a thick quilt. Victoria stood in the doorway, overwhelmed. This is your brother's house? She asked. Our father built it, Sarah said, her smile fading a little. He died 4 years ago in a rock slide while checking the cattle in the upper pastures. Zach was only 20, but he kept the ranch going. He is the best cattleman in these mountains. Everyone says so. And your mother? She died when I was born. Sarah touched the windowsill, her fingers tracing the wood. It has been just the 3 of us for a long time. 4 now, I suppose, at least for the winter. After Sarah left, Victoria sat on the bed and allowed herself finally to cry. The tears came hard and hot, releasing weeks of fear and grief and exhaustion. She cried for her parents, for the farm she had lost, for the girl she had been before death took everything away. And then, when the tears finally stopped, She washed her face in the basin of warm water someone had left on the dresser, changed into the nightgown Sarah had lent her, and climbed into the bed. She was asleep before her head fully settled on the pillow. Victoria woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment, she was disoriented, forgetting where she was. Then memory returned and she sat up, looking around the small room. Someone had come in while she slept and left a stack of clothes on the chair by the stove. The clothes were not new, but they were clean and sturdy, the kind of practical garments a woman needed for ranch work. She dressed quickly, braiding her long brown hair and winding it into a knot at the nape of her neck. When she emerged into the main room, she found Zachary at the table, drinking coffee and reading a newspaper that looked weeks old. He glanced up when she entered. "You slept 14 hours," he said. "My grandmother wanted to wake you for supper last night, but I told her to let you rest." "I am sorry," Victoria said, embarrassed. "I did not mean to be lazy. You were exhausted, not lazy. There is a difference." He stood and poured her a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove. "Sarah and my grandmother have gone to Georgetown for supplies. They will be back tomorrow evening. I need to ride up to check on the cattle in the north pasture. You can come with me if you are feeling well enough, or you can stay here and rest more." Victoria accepted the coffee gratefully. It was strong and hot and exactly what she needed. "I would like to come with you," she said. "If I am staying the winter, I should learn the ranch." Something that might have been approval flickered in Zachary's eyes. "Dress warm. We will be out most of the day." The north pasture was a 2-hour ride up into the mountains, through terrain that would have been impossible to navigate without a guide. Zachary rode with the confidence of someone who knew every rock and tree, pointing out landmarks as they went. "That peak is called Eagle's Rest," he said, gesturing to a jagged summit. "When the clouds sit on top of it like a cap, snow will come within 6 hours. Never fails." "How long have you lived here?" Victoria asked. "I was born in this house," Zachary said. "My father came to Colorado in 1868, looking for gold. He did not find gold, but he found these valleys and knew they would be perfect for cattle. He went back to Norway, married my mother, and brought her here. I was born in 1874. Sarah came 12 years later, and our mother did not survive the birth." "I am sorry," Victoria said. "It was a long time ago." Zachary was quiet for a moment, then continued. "My father built this ranch into something solid. We run cattle in the summer, sell beef to the mining camps and towns. In winter, we keep a small herd close for our own use. It is a good life, but hard. The mountains demand respect." They found the cattle scattered across a high meadow, pawing through the snow to reach the grass beneath. Zachary spent an hour moving among them, checking each animal with a practiced eye. Victoria watched, noting how he gentled the nervous ones with low words in Norwegian, how he identified a cow with a slight limp and made a note to bring her down to the lower pasture. "You care for them," Victoria observed. "They are my responsibility," Zachary said. "Every life on this ranch is my responsibility. I take that seriously." On the ride back, snow began to fall again, heavier than the day before. Zachary tilted his face to the sky, reading something in the clouds that Victoria could not see. "The big storms are coming," he said. "We will be snowed in soon, maybe for weeks at a time. I am glad you are not out on that trail." Victoria was glad too, though she did not say it aloud. That evening, with just the two of them in the house, Victoria cooked supper using the supplies Ingrid had left prepared. It was strange and comfortable at once, moving around the kitchen while Zachary sat at the table mending tack. They did not talk much, but the silence was easy, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the whistle of wind around the eaves. "You are a good cook," Zachary said when they sat down to eat. "My mother taught me," Victoria said. "She said a woman who could feed a family well would never want for purpose." "Your mother was wise." Victoria nodded, throat tight. "She was. I miss her every day." Zachary's hand moved across the table, covering hers briefly. The gesture was simple, almost brotherly, but Victoria felt warmth spread through her chest. "Grief is a hard companion," he said quietly, "but it does ease in time. The love remains, but the sharp edges wear smooth." "Is that how it was for you? With your father?" "Yes." Zachary withdrew his hand and picked up his fork. "The first year I was angry. Angry at the mountain that killed him, angry at him for not being more careful, angry at myself for not being there. But the anger faded, and what remained was gratitude for the years we had and determination to honor his work by keeping the ranch strong." "You have done that," Victoria said. "Anyone can see it. I try." He met her eyes across the table. "What will you do in California, if I may ask?" "Do you have plans beyond reaching your cousin?" Victoria had not thought much beyond survival. "I suppose I will find work. I can cook, clean, so. Perhaps I could find a position in a household or work in a shop." "You could do those things here," Zachary said. "Georgetown is growing. New families arriving all the time. They always need seamstresses, teachers, cooks." "You want me to stay beyond the winter?" Victoria asked, surprised. "I am saying it is an option." Zachary's voice was carefully neutral. "California is not the only place a woman can build a new life." Victoria considered this as she cleared the dishes. The idea of staying was both appealing and frightening. She had spent weeks focused on reaching California, on the cousin who represented her only connection to family. But if she was honest with herself, that connection was thin at best. She barely remembered the cousin, a woman 10 years older who had moved west before Victoria was old enough to know her well. Here in this mountain valley, she had found something unexpected. Safety, yes, but more than that. A sense of belonging, tentative and new, but real nonetheless. The snow fell steadily through the night, and when Victoria woke the next morning, the world outside her window was transformed. Everything was white, the landscape softened and silent under a blanket 2 feet deep. She dressed quickly and went to the kitchen, where Zachary was already cooking breakfast. "Sarah and grandmother will not make it back today," he said without preamble. "The road from Georgetown will be impassable until I can get up there with the plow. They will stay in town with friends." The thought of being alone with Zachary for potentially days sent a flutter of nervousness through Victoria's stomach. But she pushed it aside and said calmly, "What needs to be done today?" Zachary rattled off a list of chores. The chickens needed tending, the barn needed mucking, the firewood supply needed replenishing. They worked through the morning side by side, and Victoria was surprised to find herself enjoying the physical labor. It was good to have purpose, to feel her muscles working, to see the tangible results of her effort. At midday, they came back to the house for a quick meal. Zachary had been quiet all morning, but as they sat at the table, he suddenly asked, "Why did you not marry? Before, I mean, in Kansas?" The question was blunt, but Victoria did not take offense. "I was engaged once," she said. 3 years ago, to a man from Lawrence, the son of a shopkeeper, but he broke it off when my father's crops failed 2 years running. He said he needed a wife who could bring more to a marriage than debts." Zachary's jaw tightened. He was a fool. Perhaps, or perhaps he was practical. "I did not love him anyway, so it was no great loss." Victoria traced the rim of her cup. "My parents needed me after that. Mother's health was failing and father was working himself to death trying to save the farm. There was no time for courting, even if anyone had been interested. And now," Victoria looked up, meeting his gaze, "now I am here, and California seems very far away." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that shifted the air in the room. Zachary looked away first, standing to refill his coffee. "I should check the barn roof before the next snow," he said. The weight could be too much for the south corner. But Victoria had seen the expression in his eyes, and she recognized it because she felt it too. The awareness, the pull, the dangerous possibility of something more than hospitality between host and guest. The days fell into a rhythm. Sarah and Ingrid returned from Georgetown full of news about the town, about the new families moving in, about the mine that had struck a promising vein of silver. Victoria helped with the cooking and the mending and the endless tasks that kept a ranch running through winter. She learned to gather eggs without frightening the chickens, to churn butter until her arms ached, to card wool for the spinning wheel Ingrid used to make yarn. And she learned about Zachary. Not from asking directly, but from observation and from the stories Sarah told while they worked. How he had fought off a mountain lion that attacked the herd 2 summers ago. How he rode down to Georgetown once a month to check on the widow Morrison and make sure she had enough firewood. How he had learned Norwegian from his grandmother and English from his father, and Spanish from the ranch hands who worked for them in summer, and how he moved between all 3 languages as easily as breathing. "Zach is the best man I know," Sarah said one afternoon as they kneaded bread. "But he is lonely. He works so hard and he is so serious all the time. I wish he would find someone to marry, someone to make him happy." Victoria's hands stilled in the dough. "Perhaps he is content as he is." "No one is content alone forever," Sarah said wisely. Then, with the directness of the very young, "He looks at you differently than he looks at other people." "Sarah," Victoria said, heat rising in her cheeks. "I am just saying what I see," Sarah grinned. "And I think it is wonderful. You are perfect for him." But Victoria was not sure she was perfect for anyone, let alone a man like Zachary Vance. She was broken in ways he could not see, scarred by loss and failure. And she was still, technically, just passing through. Come spring, she would leave for California unless she chose otherwise. The choice, she realized, was becoming harder to imagine. Christmas came, and with it a blizzard that lasted 3 days. They were snowed in completely, unable even to reach the barn until Zachary dug a tunnel through the drifts. On Christmas Eve, Ingrid made traditional Norwegian dishes, and they ate by candlelight while the wind howled outside. Sarah sang carols in a clear, sweet voice, and Zachary produced a fiddle Victoria had not known he played and coaxed music from it that made her heart ache with its beauty. "My father played," he explained when he saw her expression. "He taught me when I was young. I do not play often anymore, but Christmas seems the right time." "It is beautiful," Victoria said softly. After Sarah and Ingrid went to bed, Victoria and Zachary sat by the fire, neither quite ready to end the evening. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, and outside the snow had finally stopped falling. "Thank you," Victoria said into the comfortable silence. "For this, for all of it. I did not expect to spend Christmas so far from where I thought I would be, but I cannot imagine having been anywhere else." "You are welcome here," Zachary said. His voice was low and serious. "For as long as you wish to stay." Victoria turned to look at him. He was staring into the fire, his profile sharp in the flickering light. She had learned to read his expressions over the past weeks, and she saw now what he was not saying, the words he kept locked behind careful control. "Zachary," she began, not knowing how to finish. He met her eyes then, and the intensity in his gaze stole her breath. "I know you are meant to leave in the spring," he said. "I know you have plans, a cousin waiting, a whole life you imagined building in California. But I need you to know, Victoria, that if you chose to stay, if you chose to make your life here instead, I would spend every day trying to make you happy." Victoria's heart was racing. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am asking you to consider it," Zachary said. "I know it is soon. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I am not a man who plays games or speaks carelessly. I know my own heart and I know what I want. I want you to stay. Not as a guest, not as a hired hand, but as my wife." The word hung in the air between them. Wife. It meant permanence, belonging, a future rooted in this mountain valley instead of the California coast. It meant choosing the known over the unknown, the man in front of her over the ghost of a life she had been trying to reach. "I do not know what to say," Victoria whispered. "Do not say anything tonight," Zachary said. "Think about it. We have until spring and I will not pressure you, but I wanted you to know so you can consider all your options when the time comes to choose." He stood then, banking the fire for the night. Before he left the room, he paused and touched her cheek, just the lightest brush of his fingers. "Good night, Victoria." "Good night," she managed, but he was already gone. Victoria sat by the dying fire for a long time, her mind whirling. She touched her cheek where his fingers had rested, feeling the warmth still lingering there. She thought of California, of the long journey still ahead if she chose to take it. She thought of her cousin, a near stranger who might or might not welcome her arrival. And she thought of Zachary, steady and strong and kind, offering her not just shelter but a home, a life. His heart. The answer was already forming in her own heart, but she was afraid to trust it. Afraid she was choosing security over love or mistaking gratitude for something deeper. She needed time, space to think clearly without his presence muddling her thoughts. The next morning, Victoria woke to find fresh snow had fallen overnight, but the sky was clear and brilliant blue. Zachary was already outside, working to clear paths to the barn and chicken coop. Victoria bundled up and went to help, and they worked in companionable silence, their breath making clouds in the frozen air. "I am riding down to check the lower pasture," Zachary said when they finished. "The snow may have brought down some of the fence. I will be back before dark." Victoria watched him saddle his horse and ride out, then turned to the tasks awaiting her in the house. But her mind was not on the work. She kept replaying his words from the night before, testing them against her own feelings, trying to understand what was real and what was wishful thinking born of loneliness and fear. She was still lost in thought when Sarah found her standing at the kitchen window, staring out at the white landscape. "You are thinking about what Zach said," Sarah stated. Victoria turned, surprised. "How did you know?" "I heard him last night. Not the words, but his tone. And I see how you look at each other when you think no one is watching." Sarah came to stand beside her at the window. "Do you care for him?" "I do not know," Victoria said honestly. "I am grateful to him and I admire him and I enjoy his company. But is that love? How do you tell the difference?" Sarah considered this seriously. Mother once wrote in her diary that love is not just a feeling but a choice. She said she chose to love Father every day, even when things were hard, especially then. "You read your mother's diary." Grandmother gave it to me on my 16th birthday. "She said it would help me understand my mother, even though I never knew her." Sarah touched Victoria's arm. "All I know is that Zach has not looked at anyone the way he looks at you, and I have never seen you as peaceful as you are here. Maybe that means something." Maybe it did, Victoria thought. When Zachary returned that evening, wind-burned and exhausted, Victoria had supper waiting. She had made his favorite stew, the one Ingrid had taught her, using dried mushrooms and herbs that gave it a rich, earthy flavor. She had baked fresh bread and set the table carefully, and when he came in and saw what she had done, his smile was worth every moment of effort. "This is wonderful," he said after the first bite. "Thank you. You are welcome." Victoria hesitated, then added, "I have been thinking about what you said last night." Zachary set down his spoon, giving her his full attention. And I need more time. Not because I do not care for you, but because I want to be sure. I do not want either of us to make a mistake. "That is fair," Zachary said, though Victoria thought she saw disappointment flicker in his eyes. "Take all the time you need." January passed in a blur of snow and work and slow, careful discovery. Victoria found herself watching Zachary with new awareness, noticing the small kindnesses he showed to everyone around him. How he always served his grandmother first at meals. How he taught Sarah to track animals in the snow with infinite patience. How he spoke to the horses as if they could understand every word, and maybe they could, the way they responded to his voice. She noticed, too, the way he looked at her when he thought she was not aware. The softness in his eyes, the small smile that played at the corner of his mouth. He kept his promise and did not pressure her, but his feelings were clear in every gesture, every conversation, and Victoria felt her own feelings growing, deepening into something that frightened her with its intensity. She had thought herself incapable of love after so much loss, had believed that part of her heart died with her parents. But Zachary was teaching her otherwise, showing her through his steadiness that it was safe to hope again. One afternoon in late January, a rare warm spell brought sunshine and temperatures high enough to melt the icicles hanging from the barn roof. Zachary asked if Victoria would like to ride up to a place he wanted to show her. She agreed, and they set out on horseback, climbing higher into the mountains than Victoria had yet gone. The place Zachary brought her to was a small lake, frozen solid and surrounded by towering pines. The view stretched for miles, mountains rolling away in every direction like waves on a vast ocean. "This is the most beautiful place in the world to me," Zachary said, dismounting and helping Victoria down. "My father used to bring me here when I was young. He said it was important to have a place where you could think clearly, away from the demands of daily life." They walked to the edge of the lake, their boots crunching on the snow-covered ice. The silence was absolute, broken only by the whisper of wind through the pines. "I come here when I need to make important decisions," Zachary continued. "I came here after my father died, trying to decide if I was strong enough to keep the ranch running. I came here when the bank tried to foreclose 3 years ago during the drought, trying to figure out how to save everything he built." "What did you decide?" Victoria asked. "That I would do whatever it took, that his legacy was worth fighting for." Zachary turned to face her. "I came here a week ago before I spoke to you at Christmas. I needed to be sure I was not being selfish, asking you to give up California." "And what did you decide?" "That I was being selfish, but that I could not help it, that I would rather ask and be refused than never ask at all." He paused, then added quietly, "I love you, Victoria. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you on that trail, too stubborn to admit you were lost, and every day since has only made it stronger." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "I was so scared," she whispered. "When I left Kansas, I was terrified. I felt like I had lost everything, like the world had ended and I was just walking through the ruins. But then I found you and this place, and suddenly I could breathe again." "Is that love?" Zachary asked gently. "Or is it just relief at finding safety?" "I do not know," Victoria admitted. "But I know that when you are near, everything feels right. I know that I wake up happy, thinking about the day ahead and the work we will do together. I know that the thought of leaving in the spring makes my chest ache. If that is not love, it is close enough that I cannot tell the difference." Zachary stepped closer, close enough that Victoria could see the different shades of green in his eyes. "What are you saying?" "I am saying yes," Victoria said, her voice growing stronger. "I am saying I want to stay." I want to marry you and build a life here and wake up every morning knowing I am home." The kiss, when it came, was gentle and sweet and tasted of hope. Zachary cradled her face in his hands like she was something precious, and Victoria felt the last walls around her heart crumble. This was real. This was right. This was the future she had been walking toward all along, even when she thought she was going to California. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard in the cold air, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "I will make you happy," he promised. "I swear it." "You already do," Victoria said. They rode back to the ranch in the golden light of late afternoon, and when they told Sarah and Ingrid the news, Sarah shrieked with joy and hugged Victoria so hard she could barely breathe. Ingrid said something in Norwegian and kissed them both on the cheeks, her eyes wet with happy tears. "She says you are the daughter she prayed for," Zachary translated, "and that the wedding should be in the spring when the wildflowers bloom." "Spring," Victoria agreed, and the word felt like a promise. The winter months that followed were some of the happiest of Victoria's life. She and Zachary spent every possible moment together, getting to know each other in the deeper ways that only time and conversation can reveal. She learned that he loved to read but rarely had time for it, so she began reading aloud to him in the evenings while he worked on mending or carving. She discovered he had a wry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh until her sides ached, and he learned her too. Her fear of storms, born from the tornado that destroyed a neighboring farm when she was 10. Her love of music, though she could not carry a tune herself. Her dreams of someday having a garden full of roses, even though she had never successfully grown them in Kansas. "We will have roses," Zachary promised. "I will build you the finest rose garden in Colorado." They planned their life together in those quiet winter evenings, where they would expand the house to add more rooms for the children they hoped to have. How they would improve the ranch, maybe add sheep or even a few milk cows. Small dreams and large ones, woven together into a shared vision of the future. In early March, Zachary rode down to Georgetown and returned with a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he said, slipping it onto Victoria's finger. "Grandmother has been keeping it safe. She says it belongs to you now." Victoria looked at the ring, shining against her work-roughened skin. "It is perfect," she whispered. They were married on a bright morning in late April, when the valley was carpeted with wildflowers just as Ingrid had predicted. The ceremony was held in the small church in Georgetown, with half the town in attendance. Victoria wore a dress that had belonged to Zachary's mother, altered to fit her by Ingrid's skilled hands. Sarah stood up with her, beaming with pride. The preacher spoke about love and commitment, and the blessing of finding a partner to share life's journey. But Victoria barely heard the words. She was too focused on Zachary's face, on the way he looked at her like she was the answer to every question he had ever asked. "I do," she said when it was her turn, and her voice did not waver. "I do," Zachary echoed, and when he kissed her, the congregation erupted in applause. The celebration that followed lasted until sunset. The townspeople brought food and music and well wishes. Victoria met the families Zachary had spoken of. The widow Morrison, who cried and said she was so happy Zachary had found love. The shopkeeper who extended them credit for supplies they would need for the expanding ranch. The doctor who promised he would be there when their babies came. When it was finally over and they returned to the ranch, Sarah and Ingrid had discreetly gone to stay with friends in town for a few days. The house was quiet and full of firelight, and Zachary carried Victoria over the threshold even though she laughed and protested. She was perfectly capable of walking. "Let me have this," he said, setting her down gently in the main room. "I have imagined this moment for months." "So have I," Victoria admitted. Their wedding night was tender and joyful, full of discovery and wonder. Zachary was patient and gentle, making sure Victoria felt safe and cherished. And afterward, lying in his arms in the bed they would share for the rest of their lives, Victoria felt a peace she had not known was possible. "No regrets," Zachary murmured against her hair. "Not a single one," Victoria said. "California can keep its sunshine. I have everything I need right here." The first year of marriage brought challenges Victoria had not anticipated. Running a ranch was harder work than she had imagined, even with all the preparation the winter had provided. There were early mornings and late nights, animals that got sick despite every precaution, fences that needed constant repair, and 100 small crises that required immediate attention. But there was also joy. The satisfaction of watching the cattle thrive under their care. The pleasure of cooking meals for her husband and watching him enjoy them. The quiet evenings when they sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the mountains, Zachary's arm around her shoulders, planning their future. In late autumn, Victoria realized she was pregnant. She told Zachary one evening as they were getting ready for bed, and the expression on his face was worth every moment of morning sickness and exhaustion. "Are you certain?" he asked, dropping to his knees beside her chair. "As certain as I can be," Victoria said, laughing at his enthusiasm. "The baby should come in early summer." Zachary kissed her, then placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "We are so happy you are coming. The pregnancy was not easy." Victoria was sick for months, could barely keep food down, and worried constantly that something would go wrong. But Zachary was endlessly patient, bringing her crackers and ginger tea, rubbing her back when she ached, reading to her when she was too tired to do anything but rest. Sarah, now 17 and full of excitement about becoming an aunt, took over many of Victoria's household duties without being asked. And Ingrid, who had seen countless births in her long life, reassured Victoria that what she was feeling was normal and that both she and the baby would be fine. In June, on a warm evening when the valley was green and lush, Victoria went into labor. The birth was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Zachary stayed beside her the entire time, holding her hand, murmuring encouragement in English and Norwegian, refusing to leave even when the midwife suggested he might be more comfortable waiting elsewhere. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, their son was born. He came into the world screaming lustily, and when the midwife placed him in Victoria's arms, she felt her heart expand in ways she never knew were possible. "He is perfect," she whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes. "He is beautiful," Zachary agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but never settled on one they both loved. Now, looking at her son's face, Victoria knew. "James," she said, "after my father." "James Vance," Zachary said, testing the name. "I like it, and for a middle name." "You choose," Victoria said. "Henrik," Zachary said immediately. "After my father, James Henrik Vance." "Perfect," Victoria agreed. The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings, of learning to care for a tiny human who depended on them for everything. But Victoria had never been happier. Watching Zachary with their son, seeing the gentleness and wonder in his face as he held the baby, she fell in love with him all over again. Sarah was a devoted aunt, always ready to walk with James when he fussed, to sing to him when he could not sleep. And Ingrid rocked him for hours, telling him stories in Norwegian that he could not possibly understand, but seemed to soothe him nonetheless. When James was 3 months old, Victoria was in the kitchen one afternoon, making preserves from the wild berries Sarah had picked, when a wagon rolled up to the house. She glanced out the window and saw a woman climbing down, well dressed in traveling clothes. Victoria wiped her hands and went to the door, curious about the unexpected visitor. "Can I help you?" she asked. The woman turned and Victoria's breath caught. She knew that face, though it was older now, lined with years she had not witnessed. "Cousin Margaret," she said uncertainly. "Victoria," the woman rushed forward. "Thank God you are alive. I have been searching for you for months." Victoria stood frozen as Margaret embraced her. "Searching for me? But why?" Margaret pulled back, confusion clear on her face. "Your letter. You said you were coming to California, that you had lost everything. I wrote back immediately, telling you to come, that I would help you however I could. But when you never arrived, I started to worry. I wrote to Lawrence, to your old address, and they told me the farm had been foreclosed and you had left. No one knew where you had gone. I left before your letter could have arrived," Victoria said slowly. "I had no idea you had written back." "I was frantic," Margaret said. "I hired investigators, followed every rumor. Someone in Denver said they thought they saw a woman matching your description heading into the mountains. I have been checking every town, every ranch. When I asked in Georgetown, they told me about you, about how you had married a rancher last spring." Victoria led Margaret inside, her mind whirling. "I am so sorry you worried. I should have written to let you know I was safe. I am just relieved you are alive and well." Margaret looked around the house, taking in the comfortable furnishings, the signs of a life well lived. "You married?" "Yes, last April, to Zachary Vance. He owns this ranch." Victoria went to the bedroom and returned with James. "And this is our son, James. He was born in June." Margaret's eyes widened. "Oh, Victoria, a baby, how wonderful." But there was something in her expression, a sadness that Victoria did not understand. "What is it?" Victoria asked gently. Margaret sat down heavily at the table. "I came all this way to bring you to California, to give you the life I thought you wanted. But I can see you have already built one here." "I have," Victoria said. "I know it is not what I planned, but this is where I belong." At that moment, Zachary came in from the barn. He stopped when he saw the stranger at his table, his posture immediately protective. "Victoria." "Zach, this is my cousin Margaret, from California." Victoria made quick introductions, explaining how Margaret had come searching for her. Zachary shook Margaret's hand, his expression softening with understanding. "You are welcome to stay with us as long as you like," he said. "I know Victoria would enjoy the time with family." Margaret did stay, for 2 weeks. In that time, Victoria learned about the life she might have had. Margaret ran a successful boarding house in Sacramento, had built a good business and a respected place in the community. She could have used Victoria's help, would have welcomed her partnership. It was a life of independence and prosperity, everything Victoria had thought she wanted. But as she watched Margaret interact with Zachary, with James, with the life Victoria had built, she saw her cousin's loneliness. Margaret had success and respect, but she had no one to share it with. She went to bed alone and woke alone, and her days were filled with work, but not with love. On the evening before Margaret was due to leave, the two women sat on the porch while Zachary rocked James to sleep inside. "You are happy here," Margaret said. It was not a question. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Victoria admitted. "I know it is not the life I set out to find, but it is the life I needed. He is a good man, your Zachary, and he loves you very much. I can see it in how he looks at you." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "I envy you, if I am honest. I built something I am proud of, but sometimes I wonder what I missed by choosing security over risk, business over love." "It is not too late," Victoria said gently. "You are only 32. There is still time to find someone. Perhaps. Margaret smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. I am glad you found your place, Victoria. I am glad you did not make it to California, as selfish as that might sound. You are exactly where you are meant to be. When Margaret left the next morning, Victoria hugged her tightly. Thank you for caring enough to search for me, and please stay in touch. You are family, and James should know his great cousin. I will, Margaret promised. And you must write and tell me everything. I want to know about this life you have built. Victoria kept that promise. Over the years, she and Margaret exchanged long letters, sharing their lives across the distance. Margaret never did marry, but she found contentment in her work and in watching Victoria's family grow through the stories Victoria sent, because the family did grow. 2 years after James was born, Victoria gave birth to twin girls, Mary and Alice. Zachary was overwhelmed with joy, declaring he was the luckiest man alive to have 3 healthy children. The twins were followed 3 years later by another boy, Thomas, named for a grandfather on Ingrid's side. The ranch grew too. Zachary expanded the herd, built new pastures, hired on help during the busy seasons. They added rooms to the house to accommodate the children, and Zachary kept his promise about the roses. He built Victoria a garden on the south side of the house, protected from the worst of the mountain weather, and every summer it bloomed with roses in every color. Sarah married when she was 19, to a young man from Georgetown who had been courting her for 2 years. It was a good match, born of genuine affection, and Zachary gave them land from the ranch to build their own homestead. They settled in the valley, close enough to visit regularly but far enough to have their own space. Ingrid lived to see all her great-grandchildren, passing peacefully in her sleep when James was 10. They buried her in the small cemetery outside Georgetown, next to the husband she had followed to America so many years before. The years brought their share of hardships. There were droughts that tested their resources, winters that killed cattle despite their best efforts, illnesses that frightened them all. But they weathered every storm together, Zachary and Victoria, building a partnership based on love and trust and unwavering commitment. On their 10th anniversary, Zachary took Victoria back to the frozen lake where he had first told her he loved her. It was summer now, and the ice was gone, replaced by crystal-clear water that reflected the surrounding peaks. You remember what I said here? Zachary asked as they stood at the water's edge. You said this was the most beautiful place in the world to you, Victoria replied, lacing her fingers through his, and that you would make me happy. Have I kept that promise? Victoria turned to face him, this man who had become everything to her. He was older now, lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, his hands rough from years of hard work. But he was still the man who had found her lost on a mountain trail and offered her shelter. The man who had seen past her fear and brokenness to the strength beneath. The man who had given her a home, a family, a life richer than any she could have imagined. You have exceeded it, she said, rising on her toes to kiss him. Every single day. That evening, after they returned home, Victoria watched Zachary play with their children in the yard. James was teaching Thomas how to rope fence posts while the twins chased chickens, their laughter ringing across the valley. Sarah had come for supper and was helping prepare the meal, and the house was filled with noise and love and life. This, Victoria thought, was what she had been walking toward all along. Not California with its promise of gold and opportunity. Not the cousin she barely knew or the new start she thought she needed. But this place, these people, this man who had convinced her to stay. She had been walking to California in December, lost and frozen and alone. And a mountain cowboy had convinced her to stay, had offered her shelter that turned into love, had given her a future she never knew she wanted, and she had chosen it. Every day since, she chose it again. The years continued their steady march. James grew tall and strong like his father, taking to ranch work with natural skill. At 18, he told Zachary and Victoria that he wanted to stay and work the ranch, to eventually take it over when Zachary was ready to step back. Zachary's eyes had shone with pride as he shook his son's hand and welcomed him as a full partner. The twins were different as night and day. Mary was quiet and studious, teaching herself to read advanced books and talking about becoming a teacher. Alice was all fire and spirit, more comfortable on horseback than anywhere else, declaring she would be a rancher like her father. Thomas fell somewhere in between, with a gift for working with animals that exceeded even Zachary's considerable skill. On her 40th birthday, Victoria sat on the porch she had come to love, watching the sun set over mountains that had long since stopped feeling foreign. Zachary sat beside her, their hands clasped between them as they had been clasped 1,000 times before. "You ever think about California?" he asked quietly. About what might have been, Victoria considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but only in the way you think about roads not taken, with curiosity but no regret." "Good," Zachary said, bringing her hand to his lips. "Because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "Nor I without you," Victoria said. She leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, of home. "I was so lost when you found me. I thought I knew where I was going, but I was wrong. I was going nowhere. I was just running away. And now I am exactly where I belong." The years that followed proved her right again and again. They watched their children grow and marry and have children of their own. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. Georgetown grew from a rough mining town into a proper city, and the Vance family became pillars of the community. Victoria never did make it to California. She exchanged letters with Margaret until her cousin passed away at 60, leaving her boarding house to a favored employee and a generous sum to Victoria's children in her will. But Victoria never felt she had missed anything. How could she, when she had everything that mattered? When Victoria was 55 and Zachary 58, they took a trip down to Georgetown for the dedication of a new school. Mary had become a teacher as she had dreamed, and the community had raised funds to build a proper schoolhouse. At the ceremony, the mayor mentioned how fortunate they were to have families like the Vances, who had helped build the town through their generosity and hard work. Afterward, as they drove the wagon back up to the ranch, Zachary was quiet. "What are you thinking?" Victoria asked. "About that day I found you on the trail," he said. "About how close you came to walking right past this valley, past me, past everything we have built together. What if I had not ridden out that morning? What if I had not seen your tracks?" "But you did," Victoria said firmly. "And I think somehow I would have found my way here anyway. Some things are meant to be." "You believe in fate, then?" "I believe in us," Victoria said. "In the choices we made and keep making, in the life we built together. Call it fate or call it luck or call it the grace of God, but we found each other when we both needed it most. That is enough for me." Zachary smiled and squeezed her hand. "It is enough for me too." They lived to see their grandchildren grow, to welcome great-grandchildren into the world. The ranch passed to James, who ran it with the same dedication his father had shown. The house was expanded again and again, becoming a sprawling homestead that could accommodate family gatherings that sometimes numbered over 30 people. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, Zachary stood and raised his glass. 50 years ago," he said, his voice still strong despite his age. I found a stubborn woman walking the wrong direction in December. She was lost and freezing and determined not to admit she needed help. I convinced her to stay, and it was the best decision I ever made. Laughter rippled around the table, and Victoria smiled, remembering that frightened girl on the mountain trail who had thought California was the answer to all her problems. I told her then that I would make her happy, Zachary continued, his eyes finding Victoria's across the crowded room. And I have spent every day of the last 50 years trying to keep that promise. Victoria, you are the love of my life, the mother of my children, my best friend and partner in everything. Thank you for staying. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for making this life with me. Victoria stood and walked to him, and they kissed while their family cheered. Thank you for finding me, she said against his lips. Thank you for seeing past my fear to who I could become. Thank you for giving me a home. You are my home, Zachary said simply. Always have been. They lived out their days in the valley that had become theirs, in the house they had built and filled with love. Zachary passed first, at 82, peacefully in his sleep with Victoria beside him. She held his hand and whispered all the things she had told him 1,000 times before, all the ways he had made her life better. And she believed he heard her even as his breathing slowed and stopped. Victoria lived another 3 years, surrounded by family who made sure she was never alone, never without love or comfort. On a bright spring morning when the valley was carpeted with wildflowers just as it had been on her wedding day, she passed quietly, a smile on her face. They buried her next to Zachary, in the family cemetery on a rise overlooking the ranch. The headstone was simple, bearing both their names and a single line that Victoria had requested years before. She was walking to California. He convinced her to stay. And beneath that, in smaller letters, and they lived happily ever after. The ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family Zachary and Victoria had created. And on winter evenings, when the snow fell soft and steady over the mountains, parents told their children the story of their great-great-grandparents, about a woman who was lost and a man who found her, about a love that began with shelter offered freely and grew into something that shaped the lives of everyone who came after, about choosing to stay when everything said to go, about building a life in the wilderness, about love that lasted 50 years and beyond, love that echoed through generations, love that proved that sometimes the greatest adventures come not from the destinations we plan, but from the detours that change everything. Victoria had set out for California seeking a new beginning. What she found instead was a true home, a partner who loved her unconditionally, and a life richer than anything she had imagined possible. The mountain cowboy had convinced her to stay, and in staying, she had found everything she never knew she needed. Their love story became legend in the valley, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. But for those who knew the truth, who saw the letters Victoria and Zachary wrote to each other during the rare times they were apart, who heard the stories firsthand from those who knew them, the reality was even better than the legend. It was a love built on respect and partnership, on weathering storms together and celebrating joys side by side. It was laughter over breakfast and quiet conversations on the porch. It was raising children and building a business and creating a legacy that would outlast them both. It was the small kindnesses and grand gestures, the everyday moments and the milestone celebrations, all woven together into a life fully lived and fully shared. It was, in the end, exactly what love should be: enduring, sustaining, transformative. The kind of love that saves you and changes you, and makes you grateful every single day for the chance encounter that brought two souls together in the vast wilderness of the Colorado mountains. She had been walking to California in December, lost and alone and desperate for a future she could not see. And the mountain cowboy had convinced her to stay, had shown her that home was not a destination but a person, a choice, a commitment renewed every morning. Together, they had built something that lasted beyond their lifetimes, a testament to the power of choosing love over fear, partnership over independence, roots over wandering. And in the end, that choice made all the difference.